Hello. Today I will show you another bishop h6 based opening trap. It will cast a new light on our bishop h6 motif, depicting a new kind of motivation for this move. Additionally, I will discuss which move order should black choose when heading for the Shveshnikov variation of the Sicilian defense. Let's get right into it. e4, c5, the Sicilian defense, knight f3. And already here should black contemplate which way he wants to choose for arriving at the Sveshnikov. In our game we saw knight c6. This allows the move bishop b5, the so-called Rossolimo variation. The Rossolimo variation is well respected. I don't say it is a refutation of black's move order, but it is a chunk of theory to learn additionally. So in order to sidestep the Rossolimo, you could play e6 when going to the Sveshnikov. I will come to this point a bit later. So in our game, white played d4 and not bishop b5. c4, knight e4, knight f6, knight c3. And here again, we are on a crossroad because you could play e5 directly, then you have the Sveshnikov on the board, but you could also play e6. First we want to go this line, we want to go down this road. We are following our game for a couple of moves and then we come back to this branch. So the game went e5 and here already white played a sideline. Instead of knight db5, which is the main line, he played knight to f5. This is not a line which gives white any kind of advantage, but it is additional work for you. You have to learn this when playing the Sveshnikov, and maybe despite the position being equal after what we will see in a bit, the position for my taste would be rather dull. I wouldn't crave the position. So this is an argument for playing e6 here or on move 2. Let's go down this road here. This was not played in our game. In our game we saw knight f5. This is a normal Shveshnikov move. Now black plays d6 and here the main line would be bishop g5. Most of you know this already because the Sveshnikov is quite popular. But white also here has two sidelines he can choose from. One is a4. It doesn't yield anything, but well, another line to learn. And the other is move knight to d5. This is a line I played a couple of times with white. So this puts some pressure on black's position. I think black can equalize, but there's still some work to do to arrive at an equal position. So now you have the three sidelines in mind, which can arise after the move e5, together with the Rossolimo variation. So altogether 4 sidelines. Now, what can you do? You can play e6 on move 2 or on move 5, like in this position, with the idea to sidestep these sidelines. So this is called the 4 knights variation. I published a PGN book about this variation. I think it's quite attractive for black, and I think it's a good way to enter the Sveshnikov. When black would prefer this route in order to steer into the Sveshnikov. Now there are a lot of moves white can play, and most of them are bad. So let me first show you how the Sveshnikov would arrive, or would arise. Knight db5, and now black plays d6. Now the threat is a6, chasing the knight, so bishop f4 has to happen, provoking the move e6, e5. And now after bishop g5, we have the typical Sveshnikov mainline with one extra tempo. So what else could white do here? There are maybe I don't know. I never counted it. 15 moves or so white can play, or 10 decent moves at least, right? The only move which can theoretically be feared is knight takes c6. This is a very aggressive approach, very ambitious for white, and here black has to know what he does. So this move you would have to learn quite thoroughly when playing this move order with black. But all other moves are quite harmless. For instance, after bishop e2, black can either play this scavening setup with equality or play bishop b4, attacking the pawn on e4. One of the worst moves in this position is actually quite popular. This is the move number 3 by frequency, bishop e3. In many other Sicilians, bishop e3 is the right move. For instance, let's think about the Yugoslav attack of the dragon variation or the English attack versus the knight off. But here, after bishop e3, bishop b4, it is black who already takes over the initiative. The e4 is under attack, and let's say it is defended by the feeble move f3. Black already has an advantage. After only 7 moves, black is slightly better, or on his way to be slightly better, right? He has at least an edge here in this position. What else can white play here? White could play bishop g5. This move is strong against the d6 variation. So imagine the pawn not being on e6 but on d6, called the classical system, and then it would be named the Richter-Rauser variation. But here this move is quite weak because black can play either bishop e7 or first h6 and then bishop e7, having the knight takes e4 trap in mind when the bishop on g5 or h4 is hanging, or he can play bishop b4 again. So this is not good. What also is not good is the Sicilian move, bishop c4, which is playable when the pawn is on d6. But here black will play in the style of the Taimanov with queen c7, and the bishop c4 is misplaced. What else? After e6, well, the g3 line is one of the better lines actually for white, but it gives black equality. f4 is bad due to bishop b4. So on many white moves, black just develops his bishop to b4 with an attack on e4. That is the virtue of this e6 setup. The bishop is still good to go to b4. What else? Some players even play a3. It's not a completely bad line, but you can already guess that black has no problems equalizing. Some players chose knight b3, very timid. Then there is queen d3, not the worst of moves, but of course not really intimidating black. So this e6 move order would be my preferred way to enter the Sveshnikov. Now let's go to our game. e5, and now I already said white entered into a sideline. Now black cannot play the normal Shveshnikov way by playing d6, because after bishop g5 white would be clearly better. There is no knight on b5 now, which can be pushed to the side of the board. Like with a6, then the knight has to go to a3. That is a big downside of white's main line, right? This is not the case here, and white would be clearly better. So black has to play differently. There's only one move that keeps black above water, and it is the move exploiting the specific location of the knight on f5. It's the move d5. Because if white captures the d pawn with his pawn, which will happen, which is the best move, black can take the knight. So e takes d5, that was the game. Bishop takes f5. D takes c6. B takes c6. Black is not so fond of taking the queen, because in that case the knight would come to e3 attacking the bishop and would later have maybe a square on c4. So black is better off directly recapturing on c6. Now white plays queen f3, attacking both the bishop and the pawn. And now black has to be careful, right? The best line, the equalizing line, is queen d7, which is the reason why this sideline is quite harmless for black. And now white's best answer would be bishop c4, for instance bishop e7, castles, castles. If bishop takes, if bishop takes here on c2, we can play queen e2 followed by queen e5. Also this is playable for black, but it's better here to castle, not to take on c2. And now rook d1, chasing the queen, queen c8, which now is threatening bishop g4. That's why white has to spend a move with his queen, allowing black's queen to go to c7, defending the pawn, because now there is no pressure anymore on the bishop f5. This position is considered equal by the engine. Would I love this to play with black? Well, as black you sometimes don't have a choice, right? This is an equal position and this is good enough for, of course, the black player. But black has some problems here, potential problems in the endgame. It's two weak pawns. As compensation for that, he has quite active piece play and might be able to push his pawn to e4. So that's okay for black. I personally am not fond of playing with weak pawns. That's why I wouldn't crave this position, right? For me, it would be an argument to play e6 either on move 2 or on move 5. But of course, black can be okay. Black can be satisfied objectively with this position. Now in our game, black played the queen to c8. Actually, this happened in something like 50 games. This is a mistake. So actually, black already is falling into the first stage of the opening trap we are about to see unfolding. This already is a mistake. You remember in the queen d7 line, white played the move rook to d1 with gaining a tempo on the queen. So the logic here is that we play our queen directly to c8, so there is no rook d1 attacking our queen. That is the logic behind that move. In chess, logical moves can be bad, right? There's always a reason also behind bad moves, but there might be other reasons which are opposing this move, right? It's always, or most of the time, let's say, most of the time we have a conflict of advantages and drawbacks. The drawbacks outweigh the advantages here. Now, white plays bishop a6, exclamation mark. It's a deflective move. It's deflection in play. And now, in our game, the queen took the bishop, and that is a really severe mistake. Better would have been bishop g4, after which black's position still remains playable. Bishop c8 takes, bishop h3, bishop g4, takes, f3, pushing the knight back, bishop d2, intending to castle queenside. This position is slightly better for white. Black has two isolated pawns. Black has 3 pawn islands. White only has 2 pawn islands. So white will try to torture black in a long end game, right? There are players who love these kinds of position. They are content with a slight advantage, and then they squeeze and squeeze, you know. Only have Ulf Andersson in mind. He was at his best in the 70s and 80s. He was a master of pushing small advantages such as this one. Black has almost no winning chances at all, right? So this is called playing for 2 results. You might have heard this term before. But now here in our game, after bishop a6, black took on a6 with the queen. This is a severe mistake. Now there's an attack on the pawn e5, and there is no satisfactory way to defend it. In our game, black played bishop d6. Actually, there are 18 games in total with this very position, and in 8 of these games, black played bishop d6, which is losing, actually. Now, before we go into this, let's have a look at the alternatives. Even worse, or the same bad as bishop d6, is to defend the pawn with a knight d7, because after bishop g5, white is already winning. The idea is to castle queenside, attacking the knight d7, and black cannot really defend himself against this. For instance, g6, pushing the queen away. Of course, black cannot evacuate his king to the queen side. The bishop g5 is in the way. Also, the f7 pawn would be hanging. What can black do? If he plays bishop g7, intending to castle short, queenside castling would happen. Now, black cannot castle anymore, so knight d7 would hang. Now, white would be already threatening to win the game on the spot. Rook d7, king d7, queen takes f7, game over. So maybe here after queen f3, f5 is an idea. But after castling, what can black do? Let's say queen c4 in order to bring the queen over to the center, maybe to e6 to help out. But after rook h1, white is beautifully centralized here. For instance, bishop g7, rook d6, that is a drawback of bishop g7. And c6 is hanging now, rook c8, and now b3. And white is already invading black's position. The rook can come to e7 now, or the bishop. So this is losing. Bishop b4 is also not much better. Queen g3, attacking the pawn, e5. The idea is just to sacrifice the exchange, but that is not much of a sacrifice. It's like a pseudo sacrifice, because you will reap interests quite soon after that. Let's say bishop takes c3. Of course, you don't exchange queens with white because you are attacking black's king. You need your queen. Queen e6, defending the pawn e5, defending against the rook takes e5, zero sacrifice. But now we sacrifice on d7, unrooting black's position completely. King d7, rook e5, queen e6, bishop e7, and the king is trapped in the middle of the board, facing 3 attacking pieces. This is completely lost for black. After queen f5, the only move where black can survive is actually giving up the e5 pawn with bishop e7. But, you know, in chess, psychology plays an important part. We are all human beings with our common human traits. Who likes to admit failure early on by saying, well, okay, I blew it, I'm giving the pawn e5. Giving this pawn admits failure immediately, and many players don't like an admission of failure that early. They want to hang on to their idea, maybe try to save it. This is the best way. It's like limiting the damage, but of course it is also an admission of failure. You have to step over this mentally. So now black just prevented white here to castle short by cutting off the way with the queen, but white is now stopping this by queen e2. Of course, black, being a pawn down, doesn't want to exchange queens, so queen a5, castles. Now rook e8, the bishop was hanging, queen f3. This position is clearly better for white, but still playable for black actually. It's not yet won for white. For instance, rook a8. And now let's say queen takes c6, grabbing another pawn, bishop b4. And now the idea is to win back the pawn here on c3. And then the c2 pawn would be weak. So this is how black still is able to keep his head above water. But white might have a clear advantage, so black has to suffer in the end game, right? Now, in our game, black didn't want to admit failure. So he played bishop d6. And as I mentioned, this happened in 8 games. Now, in only 6 of these 8 games, White found the refutation. The refutation is, you might have guessed it already, our bishop h6 sacrifice or pseudo sacrifice. Here definitely this is pseudo sacrifice. It was mostly the case in the examples I gave so far on my channel, right? Because if you take, things are quite easy. After queen f6 there's a double attack, so black is losing his bishop, right? Now it's really game over already. Now remember what motives were in play when playing bishop h6 in the previous videos. Freezing was a motive, forcing black to redevelop, you know, the regression trap. But there is no bishop f8 here possible. If a bishop f8, White can simply take the pawn, so it's regression is not even possible here. Then we had games, for instance, Brown Bisque, so my first bishop h6 game, where bishop h6 was played in order to clear the first rank for the a1 rook, to keep black occupied there on the king side, in order to use this time for activating the rook. This is also not the place here. The motivation behind bishop h6 in this particular position is very simple. This is the most simple you can imagine. It's just winning the pawn g7, attacking this pawn in order to win it. There is no way black can cope with this. There has been a game here which I actually witnessed personally. It was played in the German Bundesliga, and my teammate Carsten Müller had this position on the board with the white pieces. It was the game Carsten Müller against Ari Ziegler, international master from Sweden. So he was falling into this trap, but he was not the only good player. There were 2,400 players falling into the bishop h6 trap. So this says that the trap is not completely trivial, right? So don't tell me, well, bishop h6, yeah, this is so easy to see. Every Russian schoolboy would spot bishop h6 here. No, that's not the case. 400 players have fallen into it. Of course, I prepared this video, but whenever I stumble about an opening track, there is like a little pleasure I have there. I'm openly admitting this. So I'm looking up how many people fell into it. Well, if other people have a damage, it's always sometimes very nice, right? If you're not involved into that damage. And then I sort by elo, right? Who was the strongest player, or who were the strongest players falling into this trap? So this is what I'm doing. I tell you also the background. It's not that I rejoice on the dismal of other persons, but you know, chess is a game that can really eat at you, because when I play my games through, you know, with Stockfish, when I analyze my own games, I see so many mistakes. This makes me feel very humble. It makes me feel small. But when I see other players also making stupid moves or falling into traps, it puts things into perspective. So I don't feel so small anymore. Please, my apologies for this human habit of mine. Now, let's go back to bishop h6. What can black do? He cannot do much, cannot take the bishop, cannot play bishop f8. Knight h5 was happening in this game, Müller against Ziegler. But this move really doesn't put up a lot of resistance. Actually, the best move would be now queenside castling, but also taking the knight is okay. Pawn takes knight and now castling, and of course black has to do something with his king, and the bishop is hanging, so he has to castle. But after queen takes f7, things are clear. White is up a pawn and has a better pawn structure. So this was clearly winning. Okay, now let's go to our game. In the game at present we saw rook g8 defending the pawn, but of course allowing for bishop takes g7. Rook g7, queen takes f6, so that was a pawn. And now, of course, there's a double attack on rook and bishop, so rook g6 is the only move. We saw a check coming here. The bishop has to retreat, otherwise the rook a8 would fall. So bishop f8 forced. And now white is castling queenside. White has grabbed a pawn and is of course also ahead of development. Now h7 is under attack and the rook now defended this pawn. Also temporarily trapping the queen. But there is no way to get at the queen here. You don't have enough firepower with black. So for a short while, white has to do without his queen. So he finishes his development by attacking the e5 pawn. This has to be defended. And now the best move would have been rook d6, attacking the f pawn. Let's say king e7, rook d1, threatening rook d7, right? To penetrate the position here. So queen c8, and after knight e4 it's game over because the f6 pawn is under attack again. But the knight could also go to c5, followed by rook d7 or rook e6. So it's quite hopeless. That would have been the best move, but also f4 is playable, which is a game continuation. Rook b8. Maybe there's some counterplay in the b file. The pawn b2 might be weak, but first white takes here, directly threatening to take again with check. So black has to keep the position closed with f5. e6, introducing the option to play e7, right? Queen b6, attacking the b pawn. Queen b2 is something we want to avoid. There is no need for white to engage in any adventures anymore. It is clearly one position. And now let's go for rook d8. This is just a variation. I want to show you how white will free again his queen after this move. King b1, saving the queen, the king here, so there is no queen e3 check later, no check on the diagonals. Queen f5, this is an engine variation, takes, rook f1, attacking the f pawn, queen e7, g4, this is the best move, fg4, and now knight e4 again. You see, the cavalry is coming, helping white's queen. Now, there are many threats. Knight f6 is an idea, for instance. After a5, black cannot do a lot. He cannot take on e6 because the bishop f8 would be hanging. So let's make like a waiting move, a5, and now the knight is coming here. And finally, you see, white's queen gets liberated again. In our game, which didn't last very long anymore, black played queen b4. White simply defended the knight. King e7, a3, attacking the queen, queen c5, and now rook d7 check. What can black do? There happened king f6, but after e7, the fight was over, because after bishop takes e7, queen takes b8, what would happen? This was our game. I hope you liked it. I hope you liked my contemplation about the right move order to get into the Sveshnikov. I would say in this case, there is no right or wrong. It's a matter of taste. It's always trade-off in chess. You know, you have advantages arguing for the e5 variation, the traditional Shveshnikov move order, but there are also arguments for the e6 move order. So it's up to you which one you would prefer. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.